Nobody in Blackwater Prison could explain inmate Daniel Reed. For 3 straight years, he never stepped outside his cell. Not once. Not for yard time. Not for meals. Not even when fights exploded in the prison halls and guards forced every inmate onto the ground. The other prisoners whispered about him at night. "He's hiding something. He's crazy. He's dead and they don't want us to know." But the truth was far worse. On a freezing night in November, Officer Marcus Hale finally unlocked Daniel's cell after hearing strange scratching sounds coming from inside. The lights in the hallway flickered above him. Every other prisoner had gone silent. Marcus pushed the heavy door open. And then he froze. The cell was empty. But Daniel Reed was supposed to be inside. The bed was still warm. The tiny sink dripped slowly. Scratch marks covered the concrete walls from top to bottom. And written across the wall in dark letters were 6 terrifying words. "He never let me leave." Marcus felt cold sweat run down his neck. Because the prison cameras showed something impossible. Daniel Reed had never walked out of the cell. Not once. And then Marcus heard breathing behind him. Slow, heavy, very close. He turned around. 3 years earlier,
Daniel!
Blackwater
They're
Prison
killing
stood
him!
deep in the
You
woods
have
of
to
Montana.
help him!
Snow covered the fences almost every winter, and the cold air made the prison feel dead. The building was old and gray, with rusty pipes that droned loudly at night.
Fall
New
back! They've
guards
breached the
hated
main
working
corridor!
there. Old
Keep
guards
pushing!
refused to
We're
talk
taking this
about it.
place over!
Daniel Reed arrived there on a rainy afternoon in handcuffs. He was 34 years old, tall, thin, and strangely calm. He had dark hair, pale skin, and cold blue eyes that never seemed to blink. 2 federal officers escorted him through the prison halls while inmates screamed from their cells. "Who's the new guy? What did he do? Why's he smiling like that?" But Daniel never answered anyone. Warden Thomas Graves watched him closely from a second-floor balcony. "You keep this one locked down," the warden said quietly. "No mistakes." Officer Marcus Hale frowned. "He doesn't look dangerous." The warden turned slowly toward him. "That's what scares me." Nobody knew much about Daniel Reed. Some said he robbed banks across 3 states. Some believed he worked with dangerous gangs. Others whispered that entire families disappeared after meeting him. But no one could prove anything. The strangest part was this. Daniel never denied the stories. He simply stayed silent. That first night, Marcus brought Daniel his dinner tray. Most inmates shouted insults or begged for favors. Daniel only sat quietly on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. Marcus slid the tray through the slot. "You should eat," Marcus said. Daniel slowly looked up. "You ever hear walls breathe, officer?" Marcus laughed nervously. "What?" Daniel pointed toward the concrete wall beside his bed. "At night," he whispered, "this prison talks." Marcus rolled his eyes and walked away. But later that night, while doing rounds, he heard something strange. A scratching sound. Very soft. Very slow. Coming from Daniel's cell. Marcus stopped outside the bars. Scratch. 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 Daniel sat perfectly still on his bed in the darkness. "Reed," Marcus called. "What's that noise?" Daniel smiled faintly. "That's him." Marcus felt uneasy. "Who?" Daniel's smile disappeared. "The man inside the walls." The next morning, another inmate named Curtis Lane attacked a guard during breakfast. Fights broke out everywhere. Prison alarms screamed through the halls. Guards rushed inmates back into their cells. But during the chaos, something strange happened. Daniel Reed never moved. He stayed sitting on his bed with his hands folded while the entire prison exploded around him. Later that night, Curtis Lane began screaming from his cell. Guards rushed down the hallway. Curtis stood against the bars, shaking badly. "He's watching me," Curtis yelled. "Who's watching you?" Marcus asked. Curtis pointed toward Daniel's cell across the hall. But Daniel was asleep. Or at least he looked asleep. Curtis grabbed Marcus by the shirt. "He was standing in my cell 5 minutes ago." Curtis screamed. "I swear he was." Marcus shoved him back. "That's impossible." Curtis looked terrified. Then he whispered something that made Marcus's stomach twist. He told me nobody ever leaves Blackwater Prison alive. The hallway lights suddenly flickered. Once. Twice. Then every cell door on the entire block unlocked at the exact same time. The sound of metal doors unlocking echoed through the prison block like thunder. One by one, the heavy cell doors slowly creaked open. Every inmate froze. Then the screaming started. Prisoners rushed into the hallway, shoving each other, yelling, punching walls, trying to escape the block before guards could regain control. Red emergency lights flashed across the gray concrete halls while alarms blasted through the prison. Officer Marcus Hale grabbed his radio. All units to cell block D. We have a full unlock. Repeat, full unlock. But the radio only answered with loud static. Marcus looked toward Daniel Reed's cell. The door was open. But Daniel had not moved. He still sat quietly on his bed with his hands folded, staring forward like nothing was happening around him. The inmates noticed too. Nobody went near his cell. Even the toughest prisoners backed away from it. Curtis Lane pointed with shaking hands. "See? I told you. Something's wrong with him." Another inmate named Big Tommy cursed loudly. "Forget him. We're getting out of here." Tommy sprinted down the hallway with 3 other prisoners behind him. Marcus chased after them, but suddenly the lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the prison. The screams became louder. Metal crashed somewhere nearby. Someone cried for help. Then came a terrible sound. Crunch. A sound like bones breaking. Marcus stopped breathing for a second. The emergency backup lights finally flickered on. The hallway looked different now. Blood stained the floor near the exit door. Big Tommy lay motionless beside the wall. The other 3 inmates had vanished completely. Marcus stared in horror. There was no sign of a fight. No sign of weapons. Just Tommy's frozen face, locked in terror. And scratched into the floor beside him were the words, "Stay inside your cell." Marcus felt cold all over. The guards forced the remaining inmates back into lockdown. Some prisoners cried. Others refused to speak at all. By morning, rumors spread across every block in Blackwater Prison. The prison was cursed. And somehow Daniel Reed was connected to it. Later that day, Warden Graves called Marcus into his office. Rain hammered against the windows while old ceiling fans spun slowly overhead. "You saw what happened last night," the warden said quietly. Marcus nodded. "The doors unlocked by themselves." The warden lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "That prison block has done that before." Marcus frowned. "Before?" The old warden looked exhausted suddenly, like he had not slept in years. 25 years ago, 6 inmates disappeared from that same hallway. He paused. "No bodies were ever found." Marcus stared at him. "What does that have to do with Daniel Reed?" The warden looked toward the office door to make sure nobody else could hear. "Because Daniel asked for that exact cell before he arrived." Marcus blinked. "What?" "He knew the number. Cell 214. The warden swallowed hard. Nobody outside this prison should know about that cell. Marcus felt uneasy again. "That's impossible." The warden leaned closer. "Daniel Reed has been here before." Marcus laughed nervously. "That can't be true. We would have records." "We don't," the warden whispered. "That's the problem." That night, Marcus could not stop thinking about the empty look in Daniel's eyes. Around midnight, he returned to cell block D alone. Most of the prisoners were asleep now. The hall was silent except for dripping pipes and distant thunder outside. Marcus stopped in front of Daniel's cell. Daniel sat awake in the darkness, almost like he had been waiting. "You've got people scared," Marcus said. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "They should be scared." Marcus stepped closer to the bars. "What happened here 25 years ago?" Daniel smiled faintly. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." For a long moment, Daniel stayed silent. Then he spoke softly. "There used to be another prisoner in this cell." Marcus crossed his arms. "What prisoner?" Daniel looked slowly toward the wall beside his bed. "The one who never left." Marcus felt goosebumps rise on his arms. "What are you talking about?" Daniel stood up for the first time in days. The movement alone felt wrong somehow. "There are places in this prison people were never meant to open," Daniel whispered. "Places under the walls." Marcus stared at him carefully. "You're lying." Daniel stepped closer to the bars. His pale face looked almost sick under the dim lights. "3 guards went missing after they opened the lower tunnels in 1989, he said quietly. "The prison covered it up." Marcus's mouth went dry. "How do you know that?" Daniel's eyes locked onto his. "Because I was there." Before Marcus could answer, a loud bang echoed somewhere deep below the prison floor. Both men froze. Another bang followed. Then screaming. Not from the cell block. From underneath it. The screaming under the prison floor sounded far away at first. Then it got louder. Closer. Like someone deep underground was running through the tunnels beneath Blackwater Prison. Officer Marcus Hale grabbed his flashlight tightly. "What was that?" he whispered. Daniel Reed slowly stepped back into the shadows of his cell. "You should leave," Daniel said quietly. Marcus stared at him. "There are no tunnels under this block." Daniel gave a weak smile. "That's what they tell the new guards." The screaming stopped suddenly. Now the prison felt completely silent again. Too silent. Marcus turned toward the dark hallway. Every instinct told him to walk away. But another part of him needed answers. He looked back at Daniel. "You're coming with me." Daniel's expression changed immediately. For the first time since arriving at Blackwater Prison, he looked afraid. "No," Daniel whispered quickly. "Do not open this cell." Marcus frowned. "Why?" Daniel stepped backward fast. "Because if I leave this room, he'll know." Marcus felt anger rising now. Enough with the games. He pulled the keys from his belt and unlocked the cell door. The heavy metal door creaked open slowly. Daniel did not move. Marcus pointed toward the hallway. "Out." For several seconds, Daniel just stood there staring at the open doorway like it was something terrible. Then the lights flickered again. Daniel's breathing became shaky. "He's awake," he whispered. Marcus grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him into the hallway. The second Daniel stepped outside the cell, every light in cell block D exploded at once. Glass shattered everywhere. The prison plunged into darkness. Inmates screamed from behind locked doors. The emergency alarms started blaring again. Marcus dropped his flashlight as sparks rained from the ceiling. "What the hell is happening?" Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming from the far end of the hallway. Clunk. 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 Marcus picked up the flashlight with trembling hands and pointed it down the corridor. Nothing was there. But the footsteps kept coming closer. Daniel looked frozen with terror. "He found me," he whispered. Marcus grabbed his arm again. "Who found you?" Daniel suddenly pulled away hard. "We have to get back inside the cell." Another loud clunk echoed through the hallway. Closer now. Marcus swept the flashlight again. Still nothing. But then one of the inmates began screaming hysterically from his cell. "Oh God! He's right behind you!" Marcus spun around fast. Nobody. Only darkness. The screaming inmate pointed through the bars with shaking hands. "There's a man standing there." Marcus could barely breathe. Because the inmate wasn't pointing at the hallway. He was pointing at the empty space beside Daniel. Daniel slowly turned his head toward the darkness next to him. His face lost all color. Then he whispered 2 horrifying words. "You left." Suddenly Daniel was yanked backward violently. Like invisible hands had grabbed him. Marcus watched in horror as Daniel slammed against the concrete wall. Blood splattered across the floor. The other inmates screamed louder. Marcus rushed forward and grabbed Daniel before he hit the ground again. "Daniel!" Daniel looked terrified now. Real terror. "He wants me back in the cell," he gasped. Marcus dragged him toward cell 214 while the unseen footsteps pounded closer and closer down the hallway. Clunk, clunk, clunk. Every prison door rattled violently now. The walls themselves almost seemed to shake. Marcus shoved Daniel inside the cell. The second Daniel crossed the doorway, the footsteps stopped completely. Silence filled the prison again. The alarms shut off. The lights flickered back on one by one. Everything became still. Marcus stumbled backward, breathing hard. He looked around the hallway. Nothing. No attacker. No shadow. No person. Only terrified inmates staring through their bars. Daniel sat on the floor of his cell, shaking badly. Marcus stepped closer slowly. What was that? Daniel looked up with tired eyes. I told you, he whispered. The cell keeps him away. Marcus swallowed hard. Who? For a moment, Daniel did not answer. Then he pointed toward the concrete wall behind his bed. There's another prison under Blackwater. Marcus stared at him. A long time ago, they locked dangerous men down there. Men nobody wanted the world to see anymore. Daniel's voice became quieter. But one prisoner was different. Thunder shook the building outside. Daniel continued staring at the wall. He stopped acting human after years underground. Marcus felt cold sweat forming again. What happened to him? Daniel's eyes slowly moved toward Marcus. They buried him alive inside the walls. Marcus opened his mouth to speak. Then a loud cracking sound echoed from inside the cell. Both men looked toward the wall behind the bed. A long crack slowly spread across the concrete. Dust fell onto the floor, and from deep inside the wall came a weak voice. Crying. Begging softly. Please, let me out. The crying inside the wall sounded weak and broken. Please, let me out. Marcus stepped back quickly, his flashlight shaking in his hand. That's impossible, he whispered. Daniel Reed stood frozen near the corner of the cell. His face looked pale with fear. You hear him now, Daniel said quietly. That means it's getting worse. The voice scratched softly behind the concrete again. Please. Marcus forced himself closer to the wall. The crack had grown wider now. Tiny pieces of concrete crumbled onto the floor beside the bed. Someone could be trapped in there, Marcus said. Daniel grabbed Marcus's arm hard. No. Marcus looked at him. If you break that wall, Daniel whispered, he'll come out. Before Marcus could answer, loud footsteps rushed into the cell block. 3 guards appeared around the corner carrying flashlights and batons. Officer Lena Brooks was first. What's going on down here? She shouted. Marcus pointed toward the crack in the wall. There's someone inside. The guards exchanged nervous looks. Lena stepped closer and listened carefully. At first there was only silence. Then the crying started again. Even the other guards turned pale. One older guard named Roy muttered under his breath, No, no, not again. Marcus looked at him fast. What do you mean again? Roy wiped sweat from his forehead. I heard that voice once before. Back in 1989. The entire hallway went quiet. Marcus stared at him. You were here. Roy nodded slowly. There used to be maintenance tunnels under this prison. One night, workers broke through a hidden wall below cell block D. He swallowed hard. That's when the disappearances started. Daniel lowered his eyes toward the floor. Marcus noticed it immediately. You know about this. Daniel stayed silent. Roy looked toward Daniel's cell with fear. That prisoner shouldn't even be here, Roy whispered. Lena frowned. What are you talking about? Roy pointed shakily at Daniel. His name was in the old reports. Marcus felt his stomach twist. What reports? Roy hesitated. The missing persons reports from 1989. Marcus looked back at Daniel in shock. That's impossible. He'd be too young. Daniel finally spoke. I was 10 years old. Nobody moved. Rain hammered the prison windows outside while the weak crying continued from inside the wall. Marcus stared carefully at Daniel. You were here as a child? Daniel nodded once. My father worked maintenance at Blackwater Prison. His voice became quieter. One night he took me underground with him. Roy suddenly stepped backward. Oh God! Daniel looked toward the cracked wall. We found the hidden cells beneath the prison. He paused. And we found him. The lights flickered again. Every inmate in the block went silent. Daniel continued speaking slowly. The prisoner inside the hidden cell was still alive. Marcus could barely breathe now. That's impossible after all those years. He wasn't normal anymore, Daniel whispered. He kept saying the same thing over and over. The crying voice inside the wall suddenly stopped. Now there was only silence again. Marcus leaned closer. What did he say? Daniel looked directly into Marcus's eyes. He said he could never leave the prison alone. A loud boom suddenly shook the entire cell block. Everyone jumped. The concrete crack split wider across the wall. Dust exploded into the air. Then a thin gray hand pushed through the broken concrete. Lena screamed. Marcus stumbled backward in horror. The hand looked human, but the skin was stretched tightly over the bones like dried paper. The fingers twitched slowly. Then another hand appeared beside it. The wall began breaking apart piece by piece. Daniel looked terrified. He's breaking through. Roy turned and shouted at the guards. Lock the block down now. The guards reached for their radios. But every radio died instantly with loud static. Then all the prison lights went black again. Darkness swallowed the hallway. Inmates screamed from every direction. Marcus heard concrete crashing onto the floor inside Daniel's cell. Something was climbing out of the wall. A deep, raspy voice echoed through the darkness. Daniel! Marcus grabbed his flashlight and switched it on. The beam landed inside the cell. And Marcus nearly dropped the flashlight in terror. A thin gray figure stood beside the broken wall. Its body looked twisted and wrong, almost like it had been crushed years ago and somehow kept moving anyway. Its hollow eyes stared only at Daniel. And then the creature smiled. You finally left the cell. The gray figure stepped slowly out of the broken wall. Its bones cracked loudly with every movement. The prison block filled with terrified screams. Marcus could barely breathe as he aimed the flashlight at the creature's face. Its skin looked old and dry, stretched tightly across sharp cheekbones. Dirt and dried blood covered its prison uniform. But the worst part was its smile. It looked almost human. Almost. Daniel Reed backed against the bars of his cell. You were supposed to stay buried, he whispered. The creature tilted its head slowly. You promised, it rasped. Marcus grabbed Daniel's arm hard. What is that thing? Daniel's eyes filled with fear. My father found him underground 30 years ago, he said quickly. The hidden prisoner. The creature took another step forward. Chains dragged behind it across the floor. Clink, clink, clink. Every inmate in the hallway screamed and backed away from their cell doors. Marcus looked around desperately for help, but the guards were frozen in fear. Daniel swallowed hard. My father said the prison secretly buried inmates underground decades ago. Dangerous men. Violent men. Men nobody wanted released. He pointed weakly at the creature. But this one survived. The creature's hollow eyes never left Daniel. You left me alone, it whispered again. Daniel shook his head wildly. I was a child. Marcus stared at him. You knew this whole time? Daniel nodded slowly. That night in 1989, my father broke open the hidden cell. The prisoner begged us not to leave him there. Daniel's voice trembled. But when the guards saw him, they sealed the tunnels again. Marcus felt sick. What happened to your father? Daniel lowered his head. He disappeared the next night. Thunder exploded outside the prison. The creature suddenly let out a horrible scream that echoed through every hallway in Blackwater Prison. Lights burst overhead. Cell doors rattled violently. The walls shook again. Marcus realized something terrible. The prison itself was falling apart. Chunks of concrete crashed from the ceiling while alarms screamed once more. We need to get everyone out. Lena shouted. But Daniel grabbed Marcus suddenly. No, he whispered. If he leaves this block, more people will die. The creature moved closer now, dragging its chains behind it. Marcus stepped protectively in front of Daniel. Stay back. The creature stopped. Then it slowly pointed toward cell 214. Marcus frowned. What does it want? Daniel looked toward the open cell door. And finally, he understood. 4 years, Daniel had never left his cell because he was not hiding from the guards. He was keeping the creature trapped. The moment he stayed inside cell 214, the hidden prisoner could not fully escape. That was the truth nobody understood. Daniel looked at Marcus calmly now. You need to lock the cell again. Marcus stared at him in shock. What? It only wants one thing, Daniel whispered. Me. The creature screamed louder and lunged forward suddenly. Marcus tackled Daniel aside as the creature slammed into the bars behind them. Metal bent from the impact. Inmates cried out in terror. The prison ceiling cracked above their heads. Marcus struggled to stand. There has to be another way. Daniel looked strangely peaceful now. There isn't. Before Marcus could stop him, Daniel ran straight into cell 214. The creature instantly rushed after him. Marcus shouted, Daniel, no! Daniel grabbed the heavy cell door from inside. For 1 second, Marcus saw fear in his eyes. Then Daniel spoke quietly. Don't let anyone open this cell again. Slam! The metal door shut hard. Marcus rushed forward, but the lock clicked automatically. Inside the cell, the creature attacked Daniel violently in the darkness. Shadows slammed against the walls. Terrible screams echoed through the block. Then suddenly, silence. Complete silence. The lights stopped flickering. The shaking stopped. Even the alarms died. Marcus stood frozen outside the cell, breathing hard. Slowly, he lifted the flashlight toward the small window in the door. Inside the cell sat Daniel Reed alone on the bed. Exactly where he had always been. His face looked pale and exhausted. But the creature was gone. Daniel slowly looked up at Marcus. A weak smile crossed his face. I told you, he whispered softly. Nobody ever leaves Blackwater Prison. Then the cracked wall behind him slowly sealed itself shut.